Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome back to our meditation retreat here. So this is actually my first Dhamma Q&A that or Dhamma discussion that I've conducted. I started at a Thai monastery, and they didn't usually do these, but it's mentioned a lot in the canon and in the suttas. And when I came to this monastery here, was very happy to see that this is a very strong part of the Sri Lankan tradition. So this is basically my attempt to kind of imitate the few Dhamma discussions that I've seen with Bhante Ratanasiri, or maybe some with Bhante Sranapala after his meditations. So basically what it is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is basically people ask questions and it kind of becomes a little bit of a discussion. So there's kind of three questions that we've got written down here. And if anybody has any other questions, please feel free, kind of like a brainstorm. Although I don't give any stock advice, so but questions related to Buddhism or meditation, please feel free to just throw them out. Don't feel embarrassed about whether they might seem advanced or basic or anything like that. Okay, so I'll start with some of the written ones. So this written question says, I have a tendency to want to control my breath when meditating. Any advice on how to let my breathing be more natural? And so my understanding is that there's one way that a teacher I really respect recommends. His name is Thanissaro Bhikkhu. And it's basically, if you want to make a change in your breath, sometimes we need to make changes in our breath, then we just think about the change that we need to make. So just think shorter, and then let the body respond on its own. Just think longer, and let the body respond on its own. Just think, more comfortable, things like that, and then just let the body respond on its own. But the thing about breath meditation, my understanding, is that it's not always the case that we kind of just want the breath to be in its, quote unquote, natural state, right? So, sometimes our breathing can amplify negative emotions, negative habit patterns. There's a particular way people can sometimes breathe, say when they're angry, right? And so in that case, it's not the time to just let the breath be kind of really tense or really short, That's the time to actually manipulate the breath, to make it more smooth, more calm. And in terms of when it's the time to just let the breath be, if the breath is kind of going well, if it's going smoothly and calmly, then it's basically, my understanding is one thing you can do is just kind of try to take yourself back to being more of an observer. So there's, especially in Western culture, like in the West, our training from the time we're very young is to be a kind of active manipulator in experiences, kind of part and parcel of, building buildings, building roads, building airplanes. You have to take these kind of external elements and manipulate them to make them something that we want them to be. And there is a time and a place for this. But that tendency gets carried over to our breath, and when things are going fine, we try to manipulate it. So there is also this aspect of, if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. And so for that, we have to take ourselves away from this kind of, this active going out type of attitude towards more of a receptive type of attitude. So I know that now actually, this is basically something that takes practice, kind of learning to go back to the observer. It's kind of like if you imagine you have your attention kind of in front of you, it's like learning to pull it back, like this, kind of back, maybe almost feeling like back towards the back of your head. So not so many kind of words you can describe that with, I guess, in English. Maybe they have some in Pali. But basically learning to just be the part of the mind that observes. Doesn't do anything. It just watches. This part of the mind is called vijnana in Pali, kind of consciousness. It's just conscious of what's going on. So learning to become more that part of the mind is appropriate. at times in our practice. When our breath is going well, no need to manipulate. Fine to watch is my understanding. It's kind of something that takes practice. So that's one. I have a tendency to want to control my breath when meditating. Let's see another one here. Is it important to have one meditation teacher and follow his method, or can we have multiple meditation teachers? So my understanding from the tradition I train and also from the canon is that actually the Buddha didn't really teach like a meditation method. So we can see that kind of pretty clearly in the Pali Canon. You look at his instructions for Anapanasati, it's like breathe in and out, he breathes in and out, calming the mind. He breathes in and out, relaxing the mind. He breathes in and out, sensitive to rapture. Breathes in and out, sensitive to pleasure. These kind of things. But there's not really any step-by-step instructions on how to do that. So what do we do to breathe in and out sensitive to pleasure, sensitive to rapture? And this is part of the Buddha's skill as a teacher, actually. Because there's so many ways to do that. And the same way doesn't work every time. So that's one of the very important lessons that we learn in meditation, is that there is a kind of method to follow. We stay within the confines of what the Buddha taught, but there's also a lot of room to play, a lot of room to develop a skill. You can see this kind of in basically any skill we develop, even computers, something that's like so, it's kind of abstracted from our natural world. Even with computers, I was trying to teach a guy how to use computers once, and he wanted these steps. Like, okay, teach me how to do step A, B, C, D, and I want this program to run the way I want. And I was like, well, but if you have another program open, then that step doesn't apply. You have to close that program first, and then go to do these steps, Or if, your program, some pop-up pops up in the middle of your you're trying to do these steps, and what are you going to do? You have to close the pop-up, Or, they update the program version, and suddenly the steps that we used to follow don't work anymore. What are you going to do? This is something that's very simple. Like a computer is built to just do whatever humans want it to when they want, but we can't follow a method, even with a computer. So there's actually nothing more complicated than the mind. There's nothing more difficult to train. The work of training the mind is the most difficult and most rewarding work that's possible to undertake. So that being the case, we can't just decide, I'm going to have this particular method that I learned from this particular teacher, and I'm going to keep doing it no matter what. That's a good way to run into stagnation in our meditation practice. It's like, I remember kind of sometimes having to chop a tree and kind of chop these trees down. I used to, not as a monk, but as a layman, used to live in the forest, and sometimes you'd have to take down trees. And if you took down a tree by just taking a chainsaw and sticking it in and keep going, the blade catches. You can't keep going that way. You have to come from another side and cut. Then you have to come from another side, and you have to keep finding where the weak point is to cut away. And eventually the tree falls. And there is a method to this, right? We don't just take the chainsaw and go, wow. But at the same time, there's no method. Have to see where the weak point is and then learn to adjust. So in terms of whether or not it's good to stay with multiple meditation teachers, ideally a teacher is somebody who isn't just like a meditation teacher. Their practice of meditation goes out into our whole life. So this is why when we see the training for bhikkhus, the training for Buddhist monks, the training for lay people, it actually consists of the precepts, consists of giving. The standards of behavior for monks are actually very, very detailed. The Vinaya is incredibly detailed. There's thousands of rules, 227 main ones, and then like more than 1,000 minor ones. It's just immense, the amount of training that the Buddha provided there. And all this is because our mind doesn't just function on following a technique. It goes out into the rest of our lives. We take that with us into the rest of our lives. So when we stay with a particular teacher, the benefit of his approach, his or her approach, is that they tend to have particular ways of accomplishing things. It's kind of more than one way to accomplish something, right? And to a certain extent, if we're constantly jumping from one teacher to another, then we actually never learn that approach. Actually, I'm trying to think of a good example. It'd be like if instead of taking the chainsaw and cutting into the tree, we just kind of cut a little here at the top, went down to the bottom and cut a little in the center, went over to the side, you know. So it can be like that when we're staying with a teacher. They're trying to teach us not only through their words, but most importantly with a teacher, it's through their example, kind of through the way they live their life. And this is something you notice when you're teaching young children. Kind of, you can say, you know, don't do X, but if they see you doing it, they're going to do it. They learn the most by watching the way that you, a parent, interacts with the world. That's how they learn. Kind of, whatever we say is one thing, it can enforce things, but that's why staying with one teacher is good to a certain point. Kind of you learn these kind of habits, and that's something you learn slowly over time by observing them in a large variety of situations, by evaluating whether or not the approach they took was correct. I mean, you don't go up to them and say that, you know, you do all this respectfully, you know. Trying to learn what's the principle behind this. And when we do that, staying with one teacher, what we actually get from staying with a skilled teacher is kind of discernment. Staying with that person over a long period of time, because they won't tell us to do X, Y, and Z. Instead, they're kind of like a judo teacher, quite often. You know, they could throw us whenever they wanted, but they'll let you throw them if you do the technique correctly. If you don't do the technique correctly, they don't let you throw them. And what this teaches us is this kind of intuition that we need, which brings us back to our first question about, or which brings us back to the first part of this question, the previous one, that there's no real 100% technique. We have to learn to develop these skills in many different situations, approaching removing our defilements from many different angles to find what works. And so we stay with a teacher for a long time, we develop this kind of intuitive understanding. The other part of it is, though, that if the Buddha even teaches, if we're staying with a teacher, we're not kind of progressing under that teacher, then his recommendation is to leave and to find another teacher. Now, this doesn't mean like we're constantly hopping from teachers or acting disrespectful, like, you know, that's enough, that's enough of you, you know. Like if somebody is given their time, given their valuable advice to us, then we always have respect for them. But it's fine to go and try to find other teachers. And actually, the monastery that I stayed at, they wouldn't let you stay in the same place all the time. You had to leave in your third year, and you had to go stay with another teacher. And then actually, I wanted to come back, but my teacher wanted me to stay there. Wanted me to kind of stay in Thailand for like several more years. Go stay with this teacher too. You know? So I mean, when I say move around, that doesn't mean like we're kind of just feeling this sense like, okay, this teacher is enough for me, I've had it, I'm through. But what it means is that when, after gaining a perspective from one person for a while, we can gain additional perspectives using what they've taught us as a foundation. This is the same way when we're raising children. They stay with us for a particular amount of time, and they learn a lot of really important basic things from us. They pick up the culture in the family, the culture in the household, but then we send them out too. You know, they go to school, right? They pick up things from the teachers in their school. You know, they go to work. They pick up things from the teachers in their work. And so we actually learn from different people. It's kind of a good thing to also not be super dogmatic, like I'm only going to learn from this person. Only if this person teaches me something good, I'm only learning from them. That's it. We're closing ourselves off to a whole lot of learning right there. You know? Right? So actually at the end of it, even there's famous teachers in the forest tradition, and their advice was, even if you don't have a teacher, then learn to pick up the Dhamma principles from nature. In other words, these laws that we're using to train our mind, they're present in the natural world. So if we don't have a teacher, we even learn to take that as our teacher. Even learn to take the principles in nature. Sitting outside, right now the seasons are changing. Right now it's becoming cold. What can we learn from that? Yeah? Becoming cold. How do people react to it when it becomes cold? How do we react? You know? Is this something we can change? There's a lot to learn right there. That's a principle that travels through many things. You know, when I was sitting down the other day doing this video, I was meditating, and this kind of tree just suddenly fell. Like I was saying, it's kind of a big tree, and I saw it kind of crash, you know? And what can we pick up from that? You know? That tree was old. You know, some wind came and it fell, you know? What can we learn from that, you know? What can we learn from the fact that I could have been crushed by that tree any time, you know? That was no guarantee that I was not sitting under the right tree. Is that something that we can learn from, you know? So in other words, this kind of principle of having teachers is something that we use to overcome our defilements. You know? The principle with having one teacher is that we usually need to stay with one person for a while when we first start. You know? It's actually written into the Vinaya that you should stay under a teacher for 5 years. Usually that's the same teacher. But then after that, you're free to seek other ones. You know? So all the time with this one teacher, our first teacher, was always a sense of respect, like same with our parents, you know. But then we also don't block ourselves off from having other teachers, right? We're just cutting, you know, if we do that, then how, you know, we're kind of missing out on a lot right there, right? And when we go to these other teachers, it's the same thing. We have an attitude of respect for what they're trying to teach us. But ultimately, what they're trying to teach us points back to ourselves. We learn to take ourselves as a teacher too. Learn to take the principles we see around us as a teacher. Because ultimately, these are things that are actually really profound. And they're right there all the time, you know, always available, kind of always teaching us. Yeah. So those are some thoughts on that question. Okay, and third one. Any tips when you feel you are stuck in your meditation and not progressing? So I think these days now, like meditation is often presented as kind of relaxation, kind of this idea that you'll sit down and, you know, it's going to be real relaxing, you know, kind of or, you know, stress reduction, you know, which is all good. It's not terrible to have these kind of ideas, and there's a lot of truth to that, of course. You know, meditation is relaxing, can be, and it is stress reducing. Defilements are stressful. Getting rid of them is stress reducing, you know. But the thing about this is that meditation is a skill that's developed along the same lines as any other skill. So in the previous question, we were just discussing how meditation is something that is probably the most difficult skill to master and one of the most important ones. You know? So that being the case, it's not going to be the case that we just sit down and right away we do a technique, we're going to get all the results we want. Kind of, you know. These kind of things actually come very slowly sometimes over time, which is why the Buddha compared his teachings to being a gradual path. And kind of just the same way the ocean has a gradual slope with no sudden drop-off, so too progress in his teachings is gradual. And we can see this when we go to train ourselves in anything. We don't jump from writing a few letters to writing an award-winning Pulitzer Prize novel. You know, there's actually, you know, there's 10,000 hours in that. You know, there's a lot of hours in that. So on the one hand, it's a question, if we're stuck, it's a question of, are we having unrealistic expectations about our meditation practice? You know? Like, are we expecting to sit down and be like astral traveling? Like, are we expecting to sit down right away and, you know, have, you know, incredible states of bliss that we read about in the text? You know? So that's one question to ask. Another one is, we could genuinely be stuck. If we're genuinely stuck, it's often because of what they call the second, there's this eightfold path. It can be because of this one, it's called right intention. You know? And if we have intentions in our life that are unskillful, that blocks us from our progress in meditation. Blocks us from going any further. You know? So if there's somebody like at work we don't like, you know, we have the intention on Tuesday after the meditation retreat, I'm going to get back at them, planning some evil thing to do, then that's going to block our progress in meditation. You know? If we have some unskillful idea, something we don't want to give up that's unskillful, that blocks our progress in meditation. Most frequently, it's these kind of intentions about the future that block our progress in meditation. You know? So to move forward in meditation, we have to have this idea, if there's something that I need to give up to progress, I'll give it up. You know? And that creates this kind of distance, you know? Kind of a bit of a gap that we can move into, that we can grow into. It's like if we had a kind of plant, and the plant was kind of enclosed in like a box, say. The kind of plant grows and it butts up against those walls. You know? And in the same way, if we have kind of intentions that we're not going to give this thing up, we're going to do this evil thing, that's a wall to our progress and wholesome qualities. And so no matter how much we do a meditation technique, we're not going to grow past it. Kind of butt up against that. You know? So actually I remember this one time I was, it's kind of a story, I was, when I first started meditating and thinking about going further in meditation, I kept practicing a lot, and going on retreats and doing all these things. And what I noticed was there would come a time when in my practice I would feel like now's the time I have to get rid of this. You know, I have to give it up. I can't hold on to it anymore. And so I remember I was dating this girl at this time, and I had this thought, you know, trying to keep meditating, trying to go forward, you know. Like, now's the time where you have to break up with this girl. You can't keep dating her. You know, if you want to move forward, you can't keep dating her. And I was like, whoa, where is this kind of crazy thought? Like, what kind of madness is this? What am I getting myself into with this meditation? And so I decided to ignore that thought, you know. But then I went on retreats, and it was just going nowhere. I could just see that this was not progressing at all, you know. Kind of just felt like I said, like a kind of box, being in a box. And so there was nothing, you know, she was a nice girl and all that, but basically there comes a point when if you want to progress in things, you have to trade. You have to give things up, you know. So I broke up with her, you know. And then, you know, moving forward, you have to do things like that too, you know. So I eventually moved into the temple. It's kind of step by step like that, you know. So it goes out into other portions of our life. This is why people become monks, you know. You become a monk because you want this space to go forward as far as you need to go without getting blocked off in your meditation practice. So I think this is one of the things in the West that, at least as meditation is presented right now, it's like you kind of have your cake and eat it too, right? So we don't give anything up, we do a technique, and we get amazing results. It's not that way, you know? If we really want the results the Buddha talked about, there's sacrifice involved. And that's the way it is, you know. Starts with normal, simple things, you know, sacrificing the 5 precepts, you know, not killing anything anymore, even though it's convenient, lying, cheating, you know, not taking intoxicants. That's a big sacrifice. When people do that one, it actually cuts them off from a lot of socializing they might do, you know. And then it goes further than that. It goes further to cutting off entertainment completely, you know, not going to any singing and dancing shows. It goes further. If a person becomes celibate, then that's a totally different thing. And then if you're a monk, you cut off many things. Actually, as following the Buddha's Vinaya, there's almost, you're basically, if you want to follow it, you have like this clear road ahead of you to practice meditation and to teach Dhamma as much as you like. There's almost no obstacles in something like that. But to do anything else, there's just there's huge obstacles you have to overcome. You know, even to the extent of, you know, organizing a retreat like this. As a monk, you can't just do it by yourself. It's not possible. You know, there's so many rules. I can't cook food. I can't call people up and be like, you, give this dish. So Irfan volunteered to coordinate. And all of this is because the Buddha laid these things down because there are certain actions, certain intentions that we have. When we undertake them, they block our progress. So if we're having blockages in our meditation practice, that's a good place to look. You know, what is it that I feel I should give up that I don't want to? You know, and if we want to progress, then we give that thing up. Doesn't mean that all of us have to become monks, you know, or anything like that. Right? There's lots of lay practitioners, but usually that's, in my experience anyway, that's what leads to stagnation in one's practice. It's usually something external to the technique, something we love, but we don't want to give it up. It's usually something we really love, you know. So that's where it comes down to. Nice thing is at the beginning, if it's the first retreat, you know, it's basically if you're feeling stuck, then it's probably just a matter of hours, you know. And if it's not a matter of hours, then it's probably the matter of something simple, like giving up alcohol. Having the intention to go out and drink will block our progress. Take drugs, it's going to block our progress. Okay. So those are 3 questions that were written down. Does anybody have any unwritten questions? Yeah? No questions? Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, just a comment on your last answer there. Because my experience, I've come up against obstacles, and I've let it go. And I guess it's really self-rewarding though, because you think you might be giving something up, but there's always a greater joy and simplicity in not having a lot of that stuff or doing a lot of that stuff. So you can actualize this sort of sacrifice. And so far, my experience has been it's really, it happens almost of its own with a strong intention to just continue on the path, and then it actually just gets nicer. This is my experience so far.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it too, right? Yeah. Yeah, it can be like that, kind of like a fruit that grows ripe and just kind of drops, at a natural time. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Definitely, it's not like practicing meditation is all, giving things up you don't want. You get a lot back in return. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Questions or comments? Yeah.
You mentioned that as a monastic, your path is kind of cleared forward in terms of the amount of Dhamma practice and Dhamma activities you can do. I wonder, do you know of any examples of lay practitioners who have set up their lives, or examples of folks who have also had that kind of runway that you speak of as a lay practitioner?
I think most of the examples you would see so far, because Buddhism is very strong there, would probably be in Asia. And it would probably be people who undertook the 8 precepts for greater, longer periods of time. And you can see that when you go to a monastery, right? You take the 8 precepts, you're kind of, almost like a monk, A lot of the refinements aren't there. You can still handle money, but you can't eat after noon after that. And you can't engage in entertainment. And once you stop engaging in entertainment, then there you go. There's a whole lot of, that's a huge amount of free time. I mean, you're basically limited to going for walks with people after that. Now, that's not to say that everybody who comes on a meditation retreat should do that, and just make their life like that. But the Buddha actually, that was one of his strongest recommendations that I actually don't know anybody who does it. It's just to keep the 8 precepts once a week. And that basically means keeping them for the whole day, whole night. Only in the morning, the following day, you start eating again at dawn rise. And when I was a layman, I tried, you could try doing this. It comes up pretty fast, It's like, holy, it's the Uposatha again? Kind of. It takes you back from a lot of the things you would do. Just keeping this once per week. So actually, a lot of the kind of things that you might want to progress in, we learn a lot about ourselves, about our meditation practice, just through trying to keep the 8 precepts once a week. Like, is this something we can do? Not to put it down if you don't do that, but if we're feeling stuck, and you've been meditating for a long time, that's the Buddha's strongest recommendation. It's all over the place. So that's something you can try. Also in Thailand, I heard about people who keep them on the weekends, like for 3 days, Eventually, the people in the canon who were non-returners, they kept them permanently. So they lived in a household life, but they kept the 8 precepts permanently. So at that point, you would pretty much, you'd be working, but then when you got home, you'd be almost like a monastic. Only thing is, you kind of feel like that for those people in the canon who are doing that, it's like they have none of the advantages of monasticism, but they also don't have any of the advantages of being a layperson. They're just kind of on their own. It'd be really hard. Not to say that it's impossible. I mean, a lot of people in Thailand were renowned for, lay people, renowned even for having, psychic powers and, being stream mentors, once returners, non-returners. Yeah. But I think that's often the basis that gets overlooked is the renunciant aspect or practice. 8 precepts. Yeah.
Just a general question.
Sure.
I'm so thankful that you are conducting if it's just a one-off retreat, or do you continue to have these kind of retreats?
Yeah, well, it's actually nice. The inspiration for this, actually, most of these, like Facebook and a lot of it actually, since coming to Canada, has been from Bhante who kind of like pushed me to to do teaching and different things like that. So he does retreats. I think he was doing retreats once a month. So it's up to Nayaka Hamaluru. I'd like to hold. I think it'd be nice to do another one in like maybe November, give people a little bit of a break. But it'd be great if to have one like if there was an interested body of meditators to have one like once a month. It's like a tune-up, kind of a nice, nice thing to do. Yeah. Yeah.
Simple question. As a beginner for meditation, and knowing that your mind is still kind of wandering quite a bit when you start, what is your recommendation for on a daily basis? Like, what is the duration of time do you think that one should start on a daily basis?
Could you repeat the question so that anybody online would?
Oh, right. So Ben asked to repeat the question for people online. So it's if somebody's just starting to meditate, what would the recommendation be for somebody to meditate on a daily basis? And basically, I think just in terms of building up to something. As a lay practitioner, probably realistically working a full-time job, once one gets really serious, you could probably build up to like an hour and a half or 2 hours, building up to it. But in terms of the steps to build up to that, I think it can be kind of different for every person. It's probably good to start on a daily basis with like no less than 20 minutes. 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at night. And we learn a lot about ourselves just from that small amount, right? Because 10 minutes in our morning won't throw our whole morning off, right? 10 minutes at night won't throw a whole night off. But then the kind of excuses that the mind comes up with for not meditating for 10 minutes is kind of, it's amazing, right? Kind of see how tricky it can get. And so in just starting this way, we learn a lot. And when I first started, I think I did, maybe like 25 minutes a day at the beginning. And then, eventually you have to let, if you don't give other things up, you have to reduce the amount you sleep, And then you can, I was sleeping like 8 hours at the time. And then you can meditate for longer. You can do 45 minutes in the morning and a half hour at night. You can do 30 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night. But always with this kind of intention, probably as a lay person, living a normal lay life, like 2 hours a day would be pretty much, it's great if you can go beyond, but it's going to get hard, I think, after that to fit in more than 2 hours on a consistent, regular basis. Although I'd, of course, recommend, do 5, But in terms of building up, could probably start with 25 minutes or 20 minutes, 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the evening, and then making sure to do that every day, right? Kind of consistency is much more important than going for a long run and doing like a half hour for a week and stopping. And then it requires us to be kind of true to ourselves. We have to have this kind of determination. Like, look, I want to progress in this, and we have to know why we want to progress. So kind of any skill, like going to university, suffer, like, or as Paul said, it's suffering and joy. But you have to, again, anything you want to do, you have to sacrifice for that. And the only reason, you stay doing that because you know what you want at the end, right? So same thing, we know, we have to know what we want to get. Meditation, we have to be determined, I want to get peace of mind. I want my mind to stop wandering. I want to see what the Buddha talked about for myself. When we do that, we have this kind of honesty. We learn to build up, kind of 10 minutes. 20 minutes, a half hour, probably a half hour in the morning, 15 minutes at night. After 6 or 8 months is probably good, That's just a guess.